Well, welcome to the Uniquely Texas podcast where agriculture meets storytelling. I'm your host, Jean Loney Dudley, and I'm excited to get to explore what makes some really interesting crops, some special crops in Texas, unique. Our goal at Uniquely Texas is to celebrate Texas agriculture and give a little love to some of the crops you might not even know are produced here. As we highlight some very unique things growing in Texas, I jokingly say from azaleas to Yaupon tea. I know zucchini is technically the Z, but today there's a reason. We also want to share the amazing families and the people that are growing these special crops in the communities that they help support. Before we get going, I want to share that Uniquely Texas is a project of Tarleton State University's College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and it's funded through the Texas Department of Agriculture Specialty Crop Block Grant Program. Um, I am really fired up for today's episode. This is one that has been noodling around in my brain for a couple of years, so I am thrilled to have our guest. This is one that when we talk unique, this is really unique. There are, all right, this is a terrible pun. I'm full of the dad jokes today, so I apologize for that. But there are fun things brewing all over the Lone Star State. And I say that because tea is everywhere. We've got here in Stephenville, we've got two shops that focus just on iced tea options. There are tea shops all over the place. It's really undergoing a bit of a renaissance. And as you dig into it, it's actually even more fascinating than that. So tea is the second most consumed drink on the planet, just behind water. Now, in my personal life, I always swore it was Diet Coke. I'm wrong. It's tea, which is good because I also love tea. Um, I think here in Texas, it may actually rank above water, but that's a whole, I mean, you're getting some water with it, so that counts. But not many people realize when you think about tea that there's a locally grown option. There are a lot of things that come to mind when you talk about tea, but it's historically not something that you think of as growing here in the United States or here in Texas. Yet there is this wonderful plant, Yaupon, that is North America's only caffeinated plant, and it's being grown and harvested here in Texas. Um, Incredible history to it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I'm bringing in an expert, and I am so excited. We have Abianne Falla from CatSpring Yaupon Tea, and Abianne is going to help us make sure we get it right. I jokingly keep saying you're going to help spill the tea, but you're going to get the right tea for us. And Abianne, talk a little bit, if you would. I mean, there's a history of Yaupon being consumed more than 1,000 years ago by the first people to live here in North America and in Texas. Can you talk a little bit
Sure.
about this incredible history?
Well, thank you. And thanks so much for having me and for highlighting our incredible plant. Some say that the Cherokees called it their beloved tree. And the longer I've worked with it, which going on 13 years now, and the more I learned, the more I realized they were right. So Yaupon grows along the Gulf Coast. And so therefore virtually every tribe along the Gulf Coast and then up the eastern coast up to like the Outer Banks had
Mhm.
a tradition with it. I am a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, and we had a tradition with it in Mississippi. But unfortunately, it doesn't grow on the res in Oklahoma. And if we look at so many of those tribes that were forced to relocate, Trail of Tears, most
Mhm.
of them are out of the Southeast, which is primarily the Yaupon growing region. And so it's been this huge loss of legacy and loss of tradition that we're really trying to piece together from historical accounts, which have to take with a bit of a grain of salt, right? Because they're the
Yeah.
outsiders looking in. And then also from archaeology. So they're finding trace amounts of Yaupon in ceremonial pottery all the way up to Cahokia, so modern day St. Louis,
Yeah.
over to Arizona, Colorado, and even down into Mexico. So it was traded all over North America.
And
And
it At one point, I mean, we were threatening the British East India Company for tea. I mean, it was a big deal.
yep, some historians say that, if we looked like for like at the time, Yaupon was consumed by more people in North America than tea or coffee were consumed elsewhere. It was
Wow.
it was ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And, the first historical account is cabeza de vaca here in Texas in the 1540s. And so it has a deep Texas history, and was consumed here for millennia.
Yeah. That is I mean, that's just been incredible to research this and learn more about it. And
Mhm.
that whole, it it had several different names, black gold, Texas tea. I mean, all the things, because
Yeah.
it was so important in daily lives and in rituals. And
Mhm.
so I love that it's this ceremonial plant. I really admire the work to bring it back and to bring
Mhm.
it back to the families and the people that it was part of their heritage. And I think it's fascinating when you start to do the reading. And we're going to pop up on the website a really neat article from the BBC that talks about this history of Yaupon and how it rivaled even the British tea trades. But it is just fantastic. It was used medicinally, it was used
Mhm.
ceremonially, and to your point, it just was part of everyday life. It was what you did. The black drink was
Yeah.
one of the other names that I heard was used for it.
Mhm. Yep. And it's our only source of caffeine. It's the only caffeine that is native to North America. So yes, people drink it for the boost.
Yeah, and so in fact, in this article that you'll get to read if you jump on the website, it talks about how it was so popular, the English started a smear campaign against it
Hmm.
because they were very worried about the growth of this. And I jokingly have in my notes, holy holly, because that's what it is. It's in the holly family, correct?
Yep. Yep. It's an evergreen. It's a holly. And it's a cousin of yerba mate or guayusa out of South America.
Okay.
So if we look at indigenous cultures that had a continued tradition, those are the cousin plants. They're very similar. A little bit of a different taste profile, but otherwise very similar. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Abianne, do you know how did the plant is native?
Hmm.
How do folks figure out, hey, I could dry this and crush it and add water? I mean, do we know anything about that journey, or do we just know we've picked it up after somebody figured that out?
Yeah, we don't know. That likely was 3,000 years ago,
Hmm.
right? And so certainly long before any written record of the Western accounts starting in the 1540s, right? And
Yeah.
so it just was unknown for so much of recent history, that was we don't know how the origin
Yeah.
and the original curiosity, right?
Yeah.
Kicked it off. But, we do know caffeine is a natural deterrent, right? So it's a defense mechanism of a plant. And so, maybe somebody's curious why nobody is eating this
Yeah.
plant or the berries or, whatever it is. So
Yeah.
we don't know.
But what a great reminder of the history in this country and in others of food as medicine and
Mm,
food as, a way to celebrate things, a way to help heal us, that connection of, I notice that this plant is healthier when others aren't. Maybe there's something to it.
sure.
It's such an intertwined connectivity with plants and place and people. And I think it's really fascinating that we get to celebrate that. And Texas has so much of that to offer, but I still come back to how unique Yaupon is
Mhm.
in all of that. Um,
And
talk,
it's interesting when you're talking about that, like noticing how it's growing, right? And kind
yeah,
of pulling at that string. Like that's actually how we got started. It was the drought in 2011.
yeah.
Statewide, they say we lost like what, 300 million trees, all said
Mhm.
and done. And where we were in CatSpring, you know, everyone sold off their cattle. It's scorched earth. We're losing 100-year-old oak trees. And the only thing that wasn't dying was Yaupon. And, it's a rhizome. So, one species will look like several trees, right? And so
Yeah,
some of the species was dying, but not all of it, right? It was kind
yeah,
of sacrificing some of itself to save it. And we were just curious, right? Like, what is it about this plant?
yeah,
Maybe it's good for firewood or furniture because it's so hardy. And it's not going anywhere.
yeah.
And that's when we saw, there were some studies coming out of Texas A&M and the University of Florida that were demonstrating its caffeine, its antioxidants comparable to blueberries. It's a
Wow.
different polyphenol class than tea, and these incredible benefits. Is a really high natural anti-inflammatory. It's a natural cleanser, and so at that time, nobody was selling it commercially and just was like, well, I guess it tastes terrible, right? Because, we'd also seen this tradition, right, of all of these different tribes. And I'm like, well, if it has all these benefits and it has this rich history, the only logical reason is it tastes terrible. That was all
That's
I could
got to
think
be
of.
it.
That's got to be it. And so started to play with some different preparation methods and landed on something that we're like, wait, this tastes really good. Like
Yeah.
this feels like a familiar imported tea and is actually more refreshing and doesn't have that astringency or bite. And
Yeah.
so I started going to farmers markets in Austin, just getting feedback from people, right? Like, am I missing something? Do you think this
Right.
tastes good too? Right.
Yeah.
And some of our first early customers were some James Beard nominated chefs here in Austin, Jesse
Wow.
Griffiths with Dyed Way and Bryce Gilmore and his team at Odd Duck. And
Yeah.
I just thought, if these guys are willing to serve it to their customers, then maybe we have something.
Yeah.
And that's how we got started.
That's incredible. What a great story. And you've, I mean, certainly grown. If you get the chance to go online, the website is catspringtea.com. It is fascinating what you've been able to do with it. And so let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, you go on the website and it's not just, okay, go get some Yaupon tea. You've got green, you've got medium, you've got dark roast. I mean, you're speaking the language of tea and even into some of the language of coffee with this. Can you talk a little bit about that? What how do you create that? How do you create those options? And if I like tea, how do I
Mhm.
figure out which one might be a fit for me?
Sure, sure. So, like tea, right? In an imported Camellia sinensis, it's just one plant, but
Hmm.
there's a million different ways to make it, be it green tea, black tea, oolong, white teas, all of these matcha, different things. And so we had three different preparation methods that bring out different flavor profiles. Our green is going to be kind of fresh and vegetal, like a Japanese green.
Hmm.
But Yaupon doesn't have tannins, and so it
Okay.
won't have that astringency or bite of an imported tea. Um, our medium roast is going to be kind of closest to an oolong, and then our dark roast is going to be taste really familiar like a black tea. We have a lot of restaurants that serve that as their iced
Hmm.
tea, and people sometimes don't even notice that it's not the traditional black tea. They just
Yeah.
notice they're not having to sweeten it as much, because one of the reasons you're adding sweetener or sugar is to cut those tannins.
Yeah.
And so you can still add it and get a sweet profile, but you don't have to add as much, because you're not cutting or masking that kind of astringency or bite.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And there are folks out there that I know for some those tannins can really be an issue.
Hmm.
Don't sit very well with everyone. And so having
Yep.
this option is fantastic. And anything where we're adding less sugar probably is not a terrible thing.
Exactly. It's always nice. Yeah, people,
Yeah.
it's fascinating to do demos and people be like, oh, I don't like tea. I don't like the way it feels in my mouth. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
often that's tannins. Do you want to try it? And they're
Yeah.
like, wait, this is really good.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so it's nice. And I know with different health conditions, sometimes you can't have tannins,
Yeah.
especially like if you're anemic, iron binds with tannins, so you have to avoid it. And Yaupon is tannin free, so you can
Yeah.
drink.
That's fantastic. And you talk a little bit too on the website how it gives you that natural caffeine boost, but you're not having some of the other impacts that you
Sure.
might get from caffeine, which is great as well.
Yeah, because it's a fascinating, the caffeine, theobromine, and theocrine together. My one of my advisors is Dr. Talcott at Texas A&M in the food science. He's one of the few that's done some of these published studies, and he thinks or hypothesizes that it's because of the way those molecules are bound, that they're released later in your intestines, and which
Oh,
means you get
interesting.
So it's a much smoother spike.
Yeah.
You don't get kind of that spike and crash. It's just
Yeah.
going to be more of a gentle release. People find it more mental, or some people really like it pre-workout or in the
Yeah.
mornings. Anecdotally, we have people who find they feel a lot better with it than
Mhm.
and avoid taking some of their ADHD medicine. Obviously, I'm not a doctor and saying don't avoid your medicine, but
No.
they anecdotally have found that it
Yeah.
really helps level them.
Yeah. We just were having this conversation yesterday about that pre-workout caffeine and what helps get everybody started for the day. And it's
Mhm.
really interesting. I love hearing you talk about one, the science behind it. This isn't just you, hey, this is what it does for me when I drink it,
Right.
which is we
Yeah.
all love to share, but
Sure.
you've got some pretty thorough science behind it. And
Mhm.
and you you get that terminology down. That is impressive. But that that opportunity for something that's grown naturally, that's harvested and processed here, and then I as a consumer have it, and it's that steady release versus that, well, I feel great, and by mid-morning I'm done.
Mhm.
Really interesting. Again, I think back to that sense of food as medicine. What can it do in our bodies when we stop and pay attention to what's out there and how it can interact with us?
Mhm.
Really, really neat stuff. Talk a little bit, if you would. You really do know the science behind this. Like, what's that journey been like to dig into it more and to get to learn that and find those partners?
Yeah, I mean, we're still on it, right?
Yeah.
We've got a parking lot of things that I would love to study. So if anyone listening wants to partner with us on them, please let me know. I think that's it, and if we're looking at like the depth of studies that have been done around yerba mate or green tea, it's
Mhm.
like we've got maybe 10 published studies and they've got 10,000, right?
Yeah.
But it is cool to see, there's, one study demonstrated that it has chemo preventative properties in colon cancer.
Mhm.
Um, obviously in a petri dish, and we don't put
Yeah.
that anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's likely because of the really high anti-inflammatory properties, like rutin. And
Yeah.
anecdotally, we see a lot of people who are finding us looking for natural lymphatic drainage support, and they're finding it. And since it's
Yeah.
lower caffeine and a slower release, it's not the diuretic that a lot of folks are having to avoid. Um, and so, and we have some that helps with nausea, which also makes sense. And so there's just it's a lot of it's this balance, right? Of how
Yeah.
much can we share about some of the benefits that we're being told by people anecdotally based on some of the studies that we've seen done around these chemical properties being present.
Yeah.
And, the fact that it's the polyphenol class is a quercetin class of polyphenols, which we've all seen has a lot more traction recently, especially on the heels of COVID-19 with
Yeah.
quercetin being a big um, talked about substance. But for, it's this incredibly bioavailable, right? It is something that you're steeping in tea. It's coming from a leaf. It's not coming from a nut or something else that's harder to biologically extract. And so
Yeah.
it's been interesting. That's something we're still figuring out, right? Is
Yeah.
messaging. What can we say? What can we share? What do we rely on other people
Yeah.
sharing?
Yeah.
Sort of
When
thing.
when when do you let someone else tell the story versus what can you
Ex-
claim? Yeah.
Exactly. And we link to
Yeah.
it.
Yes. Yes. So Abianne, what's your background that leads to all of this?
Well, I wish I had biology, that's for sure. So I went to Texas A&M and I did their professional program of accounting. So my undergrad is actually accounting and my
Mhm.
master's was marketing.
Yeah.
And then went back and got my MBA in entrepreneurship from a program here in Austin. It was called Acton MBA. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so a lot of business. And I wish I had done more. I'm like, oh wait, I went to an ag university and didn't take a single ag course, and now I'm a farmer and have been for over a decade.
Yeah. Well, what started that transition to farming? Tell us a little bit about that.
It was the plant. I mean, it was
Yeah.
Yaupon. I just was intrigued by it, right? And realizing that there was an opportunity. And I think too, just where we are, Yaupon it's native, so it's not technically an invasive species.
Hmm.
But because of the eradication of the native grasses in our region, what do they say that we've eradicated 95 to 99% of the native grasses? Um, Yaupon grows unchecked. And
Yeah.
so, it will grow through fence lines, trails, a field, an abandoned building in a couple years.
Yeah.
So we were just always familiar with the plant. Everyone in our region is, right?
Yeah.
I'll never forget the first time we were doing a tasting locally in just to kind of let some folks know in the area what we were doing. And this guy came
Yeah.
over and he was like, well, you know why I call it Yaupon, right? And I was like, no, but it's gonna be good. And he was like, because I'm glad it's Yaupon and not my pond. And like that is exactly everyone's approach to it.
Yeah.
It's a huge nuisance. It's bulldozed and burned, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so, over the years, we've realized that like if we want to be able to make an impact on the land within our harvesting,
Mhm.
we want to be doing more clearing and more restoration.
Yeah.
And so we actually just got a grant from the USDA, a conservation innovation grant, where we're going to be developing and sharing more of a mechanical methodology of Yaupon harvesting
Mhm.
and eradication alongside a grassland restoration.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we'll be working on that for the next few years, but I think that's one thing that's just really drawn me to it is like, wait, here's this incredible plant with such a rich history,
Yeah.
um, and such a rich tradition and incredible benefits, that solves, one of our biggest problems, right? Like we don't have caffeine in this country.
Hmm.
Everything that we are drinking is on a ship or synthetic.
Yeah.
Um, and so it solves a problem, and also like we can use it as a part of a transition to restoration, and
Yeah.
improve our land, because it's the transition from heavy brush yaupon to grasslands, and return back to that post oak savanna,
Hmm.
is to the betterment of carbon sequestration,
Yeah.
water table replenishment, reduction of water runoff, biodiversity, like
Yeah.
increase of presence of invertebrate species, which then plays to the
Mhm.
birds. And like it's
Yeah.
nothing in isolation, right? And so
Yeah.
especially now, it's hugely important. And I think we have a small window of time that we can actually really move the needle on that
Yeah.
restoration. And so I'm super excited about this chance to really see if we can make it work.
Yeah. And to just really lean into the native species and figure out how they all work together, healthier us, healthier environment. It there's a really big notion, and we talk about it more from the animal agriculture perspective, but it's called One Health. And it's
Mhm.
that everything is interrelated.
Yep.
It
Nothing in
anything.
isolation.
No, and everything we do starts with the soil. Whether
Yeah,
you're raising animals, you're raising plants, or you're the consumer that's, a part of that cycle, everything starts with soil health and soil.
yep.
So really neat to see that you're also looking at that bigger picture and
Mhm.
how this native species fits and how we manage it and harvest it and really lean into its strengths, but look at what we can do around it as well.
Completely. And
Really
it's
cool.
interesting. Like, I've had this conversation with a couple other companies in the last weeks that are here in Texas that are kind of doing similar things. Like, there's
Hmm.
so much opportunity for us to be doing this with Texas native plants.
Yep.
And the hardier they are, the more pervasive they are, right?
Yeah.
So, like I was talking with Brent at Desert Door Distillery, who is fermenting a sodal, and it's the local Texas alternative to agave and tequila,
Yeah.
and all these different tribes had a tradition with it. And then talking with also Brent at Brushfire Farms, who's doing this with, the prickly pear and some of these other native
Yeah.
peppers that are, again, seen as a nuisance because they grow unchecked because they're native and
Yep.
they're hardy. And so
Yeah.
there's just so much and so many amazing Texas plants that we can be incorporating more into our daily consumption, replacing imported products or replacing products that are having to be monocropped to the detriment of the soil.
Yeah. And what a neat way to also get to really see that local engagement of agriculture. You're supporting local families and local entrepreneurs that are growing this, that are engaging, which is to the betterment of communities as well, which I think is outstanding. Um, you've mentioned it. You're not alone in the Yaupon movement anymore. I mean, if you go
No.
out and search, there are folks,
Yeah,
that are coming through, and
which is
it's
awesome. It's not an industry if there's only one brand. Come on now.
yeah. Yeah, well, and that's the piece that's been so fascinating, just from a couple of years ago when our paths first crossed and I first learned about it to going back and doing some research before we got to speak now. It's incredible how much it's grown and what
Yeah,
is out there.
it's super exciting.
Yeah.
And it's I think is fun is I'm biased, but I think Texas Yaupon tastes better. It's the soil. There's a
Yeah.
terroir to anything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And where we are is a sandy loam. And so the plants have a chance to dry out versus some of the, if you try Yaupon from Louisiana or Mississippi in that kind of a more marshy soil, you're going to notice that you
Yeah.
have that taste. And I think Yaupon is a distinctly Texas crop.
Yeah.
It grows really hardy here. It grows pervasively native. People are planting it elsewhere in the
Yeah.
US.
Yeah.
So, I think it just tastes better here. And
Yeah.
it's got deep ties, right? Like
Yeah.
we all know Cabeza de Vaca from the 1540s, if that's the earliest record. And then, all of the different tribes here in Texas had a tradition too. And so there's just a lot I think it's a deep well
Yeah.
to go to.
And so neat to see it come back, and it's coming back at a time where I feel like there's a pretty big tea movement as well. And so I grew up. My grandmother was from England, and we have a lot of her tea stuff because it was very different there. It wasn't a tea bag that you popped in. It was, this really fun little double-sided strainer thing, and I had no idea what it was growing up, and now I use it. It's for loose leaf tea, and you scoop it up and you
Yeah.
put it and you steep it, and we've got a couple of different things that you can steep tea with and have some fun with it with our daughter as well, and play around with it. But you're seeing more of that as well, more of the not devices, but the implements of enjoying
Yeah.
tea at a different level. And you've got that as well, correct? Folks can buy this in loose leaf, or you can buy it in bags.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you can buy it loose leaf or tea bags. One of the things I think in general, loose leaf tea is seen as cleaner than tea bag cut, and that's generally very true.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a food that it's important to buy organic because it's never washed. So the first time you wash a tea leaf is when you steep it. So if there's anything
Yeah.
on that leaf, you're drinking it directly. So be careful where you're buying your tea. But for us, it's the exact same. The loose leaf and the
Yeah.
tea bags, we just have it as a finer grade for ease of
Yeah.
use, right? I know not everyone's going to steep a loose leaf.
Yeah.
And then we also have our Vibe, which is what we call our instant Yaupon crystals.
Okay.
And those are instantly soluble in hot or cold water.
Oh,
And they're
wow.
just a really clean extract. It's just kind of a dehydrated concentrate, right? And so
Yeah.
for those that can't make tea or don't have time or want to add it easily into something else like a smoothie or granola or something like that, it's a really good alternative.
So it's not just tea. You can do a whole lot with it. That's
Oh yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
And again, back to that science of discovering what we can do with
Mm,
some of the gifts that are already here, and this
sure.
plant being one of them. That is incredible. And I hadn't even, what an easy way to make it into iced tea, but then in a smoothie. And
Yeah.
I'm one that I do. Look, I need caffeine each day. I'm not a coffee drinker, so tea is normally my
Uh-huh.
go-to.
Uh-huh.
But what a neat way to look at other things you can blend in. And then I love this idea of it's also coming from here.
Mhm.
I just think that that's so neat. And when you know the folks that are growing it, that are producing it, it's just a reminder of how, again, back to this word, but interconnected it all is. And the history of this has been amazing for me to read. And I really can't thank you enough for sharing it with everyone here. What have we, is there anything we haven't covered? What else do you want to share with folks that might be listening?
Oh gosh. I'm trying to think. You know, so I guess one thing is we love in sharing Yopon, we love working with restaurants and food service. It lends itself really well to an iced tea because you
Mhm.
can't oversteep it.
Yeah.
It's really smooth, and also it doesn't get cloudy. Like, if you brew an iced tea, it'll get cloudy after a couple hours. Yopon won't do that. It's because it's a different polyphenol class. It'll stay clear forever.
Yeah.
And we also love partnering with other brands. So like working with Harney and Sons out of New York to do a bottled Yopon for Sweet Greens nationwide, or Thunderbird, another Texas brand. They do
Mhm.
bars, and so they have a Yopon Moringa energy bar that's really great.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we love working with like ready to drink and as an ingredient. So always looking
Yeah.
for more partners in that.
That's excellent. And for us as consumers, that's something that we can look for as well, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
Well, this was incredible. I cannot thank you enough. Again, how to find it, go to CatSpring Tea, CAT, Spring Tea, TEA.com, and check out the website. It is a fantastic website, really neat and just interesting insight, some great pictures, and a lot of really cool products, whether you are buying for yourself or even they're gorgeous. They would make great gifts. So really, really neat to take a look at. We're also going to put that BBC article up. It's the rebirth of America's forgotten tea is the article. And I want to thank Abianne for literally sharing the tea with us today. This was incredibly insightful and a lot of fun. I learned a ton. And I learned even more with you. I was excited just doing some of the pre-work, but getting to visit with you today, I'm a fan. I'm ready to go pick some up. So I'm pretty excited about
I
this.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Well,
and so check it out if this is something you're interested in. Hopefully, we at the very least gave you a little more appreciation for some of the plants that you may see as you go across Texas, and some ways to get that daily dose of caffeine if you need it. Check out more information and check out this podcast online at uniquely-texas.com. And thank you so much to Abby Ann for coming to tell us the tale of Yaupon tea.
thanks for having me.